The Nova Knicks are actually happening. Mikal Bridges got traded to the Knicks last night. Just as I had stopped recording for the evening, I had just gotten done going through a news recap video that I was going to share with you today, and then, boom, my phone starts going crazy just as I'm putting all my stuff away and getting ready to jump in the shower and go to bed. Needless to say, I had to run back in here, fire some stuff back up, and at least get my initial reaction, which you can find on Shorts and also on my social media at Who Won Sports. Now, that other video that I was working on may possibly never see the light of day, but now the shock has worn off from the initial news of the trade. I've had a few hours to sleep and collect my thoughts on what I really think about Mikal Bridges now being a Knick. So let's start with the details. In case you missed them, Mikal Bridges goes to the Knicks in exchange for Bojan Bogdanovic, which goes to Brooklyn, and that is your salary match. They also sent 4 unprotected first-round picks, 1 future protected first-round pick, 1 pick swap, and 1 second-round pick. And that's a pretty good haul for draft capital for the Nets, who then turned around and did just a full-on picks deal with Houston to get their first rounder for 2026 back and the swap rights back from Houston for 2025. So essentially, Brooklyn can go into rebuild mode while having their picks and hopefully top picks in the draft to go for, top talent like, hey, start the Cooper Flag campaign type stuff. But that's a different video. Right now, we're going to focus on Mikal Bridges to the Knicks. It's an obvious talent upgrade to get Bridges in the door for Bojan Bogdanovic, who they traded for at last year's trade deadline, who I thought was going to be like the biggest impact trade done at the deadline last year and was completely wrong on. He just didn't really play that well for the Knicks. And it costs you a lot of picks to do it. And I know that there's some people saying that makes it a bad deal, but in my opinion, you knew that was going to be the case. Not only is Bridges really good, but he's also playing in Brooklyn, the little brother in your city, and so there's going to be a tax for getting a good player from them into your organization. He's also been flirting with his old Villanova teammates that you have in your locker room on podcasts and social media for the world to see about wanting to play together, and supposedly he was even vocal internally about wanting to be a Knick. Hence, another tax you're going to have to pay. You put all the taxes together, and a guy who's probably a player in 3 pick value turns into a player in 5 picks plus some stuff for you to get in your locker room. And is it worth it for the Knicks? I think it probably is. This team is headed for second apron hell pretty much no matter what they do, as long as they want to keep this core together. So all those picks that they've been stockpiling for years to make that big swing on a big star, once they hit the second apron, they were going to have a tough time making that swing kind of no matter what. And so you don't want to see all those assets that you've been accumulating kind of go to waste without the big splash that you've been saving them for. Plus, Bridges is still on one of the most team-friendly contracts in the league anywhere. He matched almost 1-to-1 with Bojan Bogdanovic, who's a guy you probably weren't going to keep around. Now, depending on what you do in a couple other spots on your roster, we'll talk about that in a second, at least when this team becomes the kind of expensive that's scary, they should feel good about the bet that they're making because they have the guys that they want locked up. So as long as you can stomach cutting the check, the second apron has less impact because the impact the second apron has beyond the gigantic check is the roster construction restraints that it puts on you. But if you have the roster in place that you want, maybe it just becomes about cutting the check. And if the Knicks are good with that, then this is probably a good move. So what does that mean now for the 2 big free agents that they have on the team? According to Woj, the Knicks are determined to keep OG Anunoby on their team. And if that's the case, you got to believe that Isaiah Hartenstein is probably gone. Unless he wants to take a massive discount because he's going to have a market out there. But, I don't know. Maybe he just thinks Tibbs is so likable that he wants to do you the favor. it's going to be really hard to bring him back. And that's due in part to the fact that OG Anunoby and his camp have been pretty vocal for years now that they think that he is worth top dollar and he wants a role upgrade. Well, the role upgrade isn't really happening now in New York, but they can pay to retain him. And so if they're willing to pay top dollar, then they can likely keep him on this team. And that's a pretty ridiculous pairing on the wing with Mikal Bridges and OG Anunoby together. It does open up some questions kind of about the rest of the roster and lineup configurations and things like that. For instance, does Mitchell Robinson stay in a Knick uniform? Is he your full-time center, or does he become a trade asset that they're able to take his $15 million a year and recoup some assets that they just sent out the door to get Mikal Bridges? And if they do that, is that carving out enough for you to maybe keep Isaiah Hartenstein? I'm not sure. And if not, who's going to play center? Like, in a world where potentially both of them are out the door, you can't re-sign Hartenstein and you trade Mitchell Robinson to recoup some of those assets. Like, are you going to put Julius Randle at center? I'm really interested to see what they do around kind of the edges of the roster and in the depth spots and what kind of lineups that they go with, particularly the starting lineup. They're actually in a space where they have to kind of decide on, do they want the most talent on the floor or do they want the best fitting roster on the floor? Do you go bigger around Brunson with Brunson, Mikal Bridges, OG Anunoby, Julius Randle, and a center? Do you throw one of the Nova guys in there and have like Brunson and Hart with Bridges and OG Anunoby and Julius Randle at center? I don't think that's particularly likely. I don't think that Tibbs has any interest in playing Julius Randle at center, as evidenced by last year. I tried to find on NBA.com's lineup configuration or like lineup stats tool what their best lineup was when Julius Randle was playing the 5. And I couldn't find one. And I don't mean I couldn't find their best. I literally couldn't find a lineup in which they had Julius Randle out there without a center next to him. As far as making sure that he at least played next to Jericho Sims, he was always paired with a 5 last year. And so the idea that you're going to just now move him into a small ball center role full time seems highly unlikely. So what do you do with him? Do you bring him off the bench? Do you bring OG Anunoby off the bench? Do you bring both of them off the bench? No, that's crazy. For me, as someone with as much head coaching experience in the NBA as JJ Redick, I would go with the option A that I presented. Brunson with Bridges, OG Anunoby, Julius Randle at the 4, and a center. At least to start games, because I think that at least mitigates potential ego issues and locker room problems that you might create by trying to force Julius Randle or OG Anunoby, guys that you're paying big contracts to not be in the starting lineup. But I gotta say, I don't think it would be my closing lineup, and I also would want to try to find pockets throughout the game to give real minutes to that Nova group. Not because it's the Nova group, but because I think that those 4 guys play off of each other really, really well from a skill set standpoint, and I think that that's going to be a highly valuable lineup that they can throw out there with throw-in 5th option here. And talking through this leads me to believe that this isn't the last move. And I don't just mean with the Mitchell Robinson, OG Anunoby, Isaiah Hartenstein questions that are out there currently. I think another trade is coming, and it's Julius Randle. He's obviously a good player and at times has been great in a Knick uniform. He's a 3-time All-Star. He's made a couple of All-NBA teams. Dude's legit. But if Tibbs has absolutely no interest in playing this guy at center, you start to run out of minutes at the 4 that are up for grabs and can actually be split up between he and OG Anunoby. Those are 2 very expensive players that are essentially playing the same position for you most of the time out on the floor if you're building this versatile team that seems to be built in an image of trying to beat the Celtics and going with long, versatile wings kind of all over the place in that model. I actually think of them a lot as like the East version of the Minnesota Timberwolves, how the Minnesota Timberwolves were literally built to try to beat Denver. It feels to me like this Knicks team, if they re-sign OG Anunoby, is trying to be built in order to beat Boston. And it's hard for me to think of how that works when, in order to do that, you need OG playing a lot at the 4, and Julius Randle needs to play a lot at the 4, and there's only so many minutes to play in a game at the 4. It's not impossible, it's just not that clean. He's also got health concerns. He missed almost half the year last year. He missed the playoffs. He just had surgery in April. The last report that I saw is that he was going to get reevaluated sometime around September, so it's possible that he's not even ready for the start of the season. He's also got a player option in a couple of years that's going to be $31 million against the cap and a 15% trade kicker. So he's not going to be the easiest guy to move, but it also seems like an inevitable move that's coming. And whether that's to try to recoup some of the assets that they gave up for Mikal Bridges, although the cupboard is not bare from a pick standpoint anyways, or they could still try to take a bit of a swing. Like I said, the cupboard isn't bare for picks. And if you can package Julius Randle with his contract, some of those future picks that you have from other teams that are still protected, but they're still first-round picks that you have at your disposal, especially depending on what you do with Mitchell Robinson, and maybe he gets you something back, that helps with that kind of thing too to facilitate. I'm not totally sure, and I'm not going to go down the insane trade machine and try to build the perfect Julius Randle trade and tell you all the amazing things that they can do with it, but if he does get moved, there are some potential options out there where you could use him to get, maybe multiple depth pieces and role guys, or you could try to bring in another guy at his salary level while you can before second apron comes to get you. I don't know what they could get for him, like I said, but it's going to be fun to keep an eye on, and I think we're going to know sooner rather than later. So what if they do have some difficult roster decisions to make? Let's say they end up with OG on a big old contract. They can't get Hartenstein back, or they have to at least get rid of either Hartenstein or Mitchell Robinson. Maybe it's both. I doubt it's both. And they still have Julius Randle or salary equivalent to Julius Randle guy on the roster too. What other moves around the margins could they possibly do to get some depth on the cheap? There's 3 guys that I want to explore real quick with you as potential options to do that. The first one is Ryan Arcidiacono. This guy played for the Knicks in a couple of stints, actually, over the past couple of years. I believe he was traded at the deadline twice, somehow. This guy would be familiar with your organization, familiar with the players that are there, and could be a nice, break glass in case of emergency type of veteran game manager that you could turn to if absolutely necessary. And not a bad guy to have deep on the bench. And he's currently in the G League, so I think he's probably pretty attainable on the cheap. Another guy is Omari Spellman. This dude was drafted in 2018. He's 26 years old, and he just dropped 53 in a game overseas a year ago. It's a clear case of a talented, bigger guy that just kind of didn't fit immediately into the modern NBA and got cast out and moved on from at a young age. But it could be a cheap option to bring in as a backup big. Again, depth piece at the end of the bench just in case, and a cost-effective, friendly minimum guy that you could probably get your hands on. Similar to that, a guy like Eric Paschall, 27 years old, was with Utah just back in 2022. He came up with the Warriors. He spent last season overseas, but he's another guy that is a little bit of a tweener, like 6'6", but kind of plays power forward. He showed a nice mid-range game and the ability to score at an NBA level when he came up with the Warriors. I think he kind of just got phased out because he wasn't able to stretch that range reliably to the 3 on a consistent basis. But it's another guy that could come cheap and just help with the depth and round out this roster. And now I hope by now you've caught on to the joke. But if not, all 3 of those guys have 2 things in common. 1, they went to Villanova, and 2, they won national titles with the Nova core that is currently on roster for the New York Knicks. Ryan Arcidiacono was on that 2016 national championship team with all 4 of them, And Pascal and Spellman were on the 2018 national title team after Hart had already graduated and played with Brunson, Bridges, and Divincenzo. Jokes aside about the Nova Knicks, bringing in a guy like Mikal Bridges, who has made an All-NBA defensive team. He's not missed a game in 2 years, which is basically Tibbs' absolute dream scenario, and that Iron Man record streak is probably going to get tested. If anywhere, it'll be here. He's a 20-point per game scorer. He shoots 37% from three on legit volume, shot over 7 attempts per game last year. And he comes into a team that doesn't need him to be the first option. He slides into a role that probably suits him best as the second option off of Brunson, a secondary playmaker, not the primary. And on some nights, he's probably the third option if Julius Randle is still there and happens to have it going, which means he can put some of that energy back onto the defensive end. He and OG can be absolute hounds on the wing with just incredible size. You have the other Nova guys in Divincenzo and Josh Hart who are able to be a little bit more point of attack and just complete disruptors up there. When your weakest link of that four group is Donte Divincenzo, I think you're doing fine. And then give the ball to Brunson and let him be the star that he's been over the past couple of years in New York City, with more options and talent around him and more support that he can go to that's super reliable and super proven at this point in the NBA. I think that this is a match made in heaven, and I'm actually just happy for these guys because they get to live out a dream that I would imagine we could go back into the archives and find almost nobody else that has, where I imagine that they were on road trips in college together, just dreaming and talking together about, hey, this could be a real thing. What if we all went pro? And oh my gosh, could you imagine we did? And we got to play with each other? That'd be the coolest thing ever. And now they get to live it. And as a Cavs fan, I hate it because the Eastern Conference just got another legit contender. As a basketball fan, I love it because the Eastern Conference just got another legit contender. Let me know in the comments, do you think that Julius Randle is the next to be on the move? And make sure that you do the like, subscribe, and all of that stuff too. And I'll see you in the next one.